Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me? If you can hear me, please type 1. If you can see me, please type 2. If you can see the screen, please type 3. How about that? Okay, good. So 1, 2, 3, right? Are you sure? Somebody is saying there is no sound. Do you guys agree? Do you share the sentiment? So if it's 1, 2, 3, so it means that you can see me, you can hear me, and you can also see the screen shared, right? So whoever has a problem with the sound, she or he may want to go out and come back, and this may kind of fix the problem for him or her. Okay, so this is class what, 11 or 12? Okay, so Mona wants to say something. So if she wants to say something, she can say whatever something she she wants to share with us. Provided that she shares it with us now. We're not going to spend the rest of our lives waiting for her to come to the mic and say it. Okay. Okay. So asked for the mic, but she never used it. Tragic. So how are you, everyone? How how is I mean, how do you find the experience? We're almost done with the course, right? The course is great. Yeah, nice. Okay, good. Yeah, it is. It is. I mean, the material itself is very great, like you're saying. Okay. So let me share the. So this is class 11 or 12? I think it's 11, right? Or is it 12? 11. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Okay. So we're going to record the class. We're going to say Dr. Sam, and here we're going to write class 11. And we are on our way. We're being recorded. Okay. So what is it that we did last time? Last time was, remember, we divided the class into 2 parts. The first part was finishing off Candide, and the second part was some kind of introduction to the poetry course of the course. The poetry part of the course, I'm sorry. Okay. I remember asking you to perhaps go through the different poems that we have for Wordsworth, right? And I'm hopeful that you did just that, so that we can have discussions. Unless you read the poems, you won't be able to kind of connect the dots. Again, it's not my role to kind of say everything. You guys need to interact, and interact you did at on different occasions, and you interacted very beautifully, very intelligently. Okay, so let's keep it this way. Let's sustain this kind of interaction that you guys do, which brings freshness and input to the discussions, and it informs the discussion as a matter of. With your experiences, mashallah, you read a lot, you're very dedicated, and I wouldn't have hoped for better students, by the way. Thank you for being there. Thank you for the efforts that you guys are putting into the course. Okay, let's go back to what we are in for, and what we are in for is very beautiful and very interesting. Okay, it's poetry. And who doesn't like poetry? Everybody likes poetry. Okay. Of course, we have different levels of kind of love and admiration for poetry, but we are all agreed on how interesting and engaging poetry is, right? Okay, so it's poetry. And what kind of poetry are we doing? We're doing the romantics. And the romantics, like we said the other day, are a group of poets. I wouldn't say saying poets is obviously not very accurate, given the fact that Romanticism uh, was not exclusive to poetry. Like we said the other day, there were romantic artists, there were romantic poets, romantic novelists. So to say romantic poetry and to kind of say that romanticism and the romantics are all about poetry would be kind of misleading, because this is not reflecting what happened at the end of the 18th century and the early 19th century, where romanticism took Europe by storm, like they say. And also, romanticism is not exclusive to England or to Britain. Okay, so romanticism is or was or has been across Europe, right? In England, in France, in Germany. Okay. Um, okay. We spoke about the tenets of romanticism. And before we did that, we spoke about the confusion that some people may have between uh, romanticism and romance. Some people are under the perhaps the wrong or the false impression that romanticism is about romanticizing, and romanticizing having to do with people falling in love with each other. Romances where again there is a great deal of passion involved. So this is not what the romantics are about. This is not what romanticism is about. Romanticism is a movement, and it's a radical one. Radical in the sense that the romantics, when they came, they had their reservations on how stuff is done, whether in poetry, in art, even in public life, in politics, in government. Okay, so uh, those people, the romantics, whether they are poets or artists, uh, don't normally settle for easy answers, for compromises. They want radical change. And obviously, they were also under the influence of the French Revolution. The French Revolution also took complacent Europe by storm, where established orders were kind of demolished, were disrupted and challenged. Who would have imagined that the French royalty and the French royal regime will come to an end? Nobody in his or her right mind would have imagined this to happen. So when you have a radical change like the one we have seen in France, you can expect anything. And this was obviously the fuel that kind of pushed people like the romantics ahead. Okay, so they were again, you know, part of the age. They were the byproducts or the byproduct of the age. And the age was all about revolution, about not settling for easy answers, not settling for compromises. Okay, or you I mean, the motto, it seems, and the motto and the slogan, it seems, was you either change or get changed. Okay, so they reflect these ideas in their different genres. If you happen to be a romantic poet, so your romantic poetry should reflect those, kind of drastic and radical changes that you see. So, and you don't only talk about change in your poetry, you also exercise change in the form of the poem, for example. You wouldn't write heroic couplets the way Alexander Pope used to write, for example. You wouldn't go all the way back to classical models in order to get inspiration. Okay, no. Um, Again, this is the romantic poet. If you have a romantic artist, he or she would also effect changes, uh, drastic and radical as they are, in the form of his art, whether he is a sculptor, whether he is a painter. Okay, so romanticism was about change. Romanticism was about looking at the world with fresh eyes. Okay, fresh eyes means that you're starting, you're looking at the world, you're recreating the world. You are recreating the world in your own terms, in your own radical terms. Okay, so again, the romantics and romanticism is a complete divorce from what came before it. Okay, prior to the romantics, we have neoclassics, those complacent writers and artists who would settle for imitating ancient models, and that would be their greatest achievement. So, for a poet to be recognized as talented before the romantics, he or she would have to show brilliance and ability in imitating and mimicking and copying ancient and classical models. If he or she can do that, he passes off as excellent and everything. With the romantics, this is no. This is a no-no. We don't imitate classical models. We may be look at them as part of our ongoing training and schooling in writing poetry and writing in paintings and stuff, but that would be it. We wouldn't, for example, take their subject matters, because we have enough subject matter in our world, in our life, and that can be material enough for us to write about and address. Okay. Um, Again, whether we're talking about the romantics or non-romantics before and after them, we're talking about the poetry experience. We're talking about the romantics as poets, and we're also talking about them as short story writers, because we have representations from both genres. Okay, and this is again a statement. This is meant to say that the romantics and romanticism is or are not exclusive to poetry, because this has been perhaps the perception for quite some time. No, romanticism cuts across all the genres, whether we're talking about novels, whether we're talking about poetry, short stories, and even the arts. Okay, So it's poetry and short story that we're focusing on as representations of this big movement that we call the Romantics, or Romanticism rather. Okay. So let's talk about uh, the characteristics of the Romantics, and then move to poetry itself, whether it's romantic poetry or otherwise. So, what are the themes that we see repeated? What are the ideas that we see echoed? What are the styles that we see repeated in romantic poetry? So, what is it that they are interested in? What is it that they focus on? Remember? Um, okay, yes. Nature. The focus is on nature. And we made this distinction between beautiful and tended nature. And okay, when we talk about gardens, well tended gardens, and we said that this is not what the romantics are after. This is not what they have in mind. For them, nature is first of all capital N, and it means outside nature, untrimmed nature, the nature that has the associations of a jungle that is that does not have the interference and the intervention of human beings. So you talk about outside nature, the nature of the countryside that is that has nobody to kind of trim it. Okay, so if it's not trimmed, it means that it is pure, it is unpolluted, it is not man-made. Okay, so it doesn't have the artificiality of human beings. Okay, so this is what they mean by nature. It's outside nature, and for them, nature is both. It's the background, and it's also um, an active element when it comes to, for example, writing poetry. So it can be the background of the poems. It can also be part of the conversation that we have in the poem. It can be an element. It can be a contributing factor to what happens in the poem. Okay, so it's nature that they talk about and that they have as background, and it's pure nature. It's innocent nature that is does not have the intervention of human being, corrupt human beings, because obviously for the romantics, human beings are for the most part corrupt, except for those who live in the countryside and those who live close to nature. They are pure because they have their inspiration from nature, Mother Nature, if you like. Okay, so it's nature, and what else? What else? We're talking about the characteristics of the romantics and romanticism, and we said it's nature that they have in mind. What else? Still remember? Yes, the focus is on the imagination of the poet. Okay. Again, this is something unprecedented because before the Romantics, the focus was on imitation. So you imitate and copy classical models, and this is what distinguishes you from others. If you can imitate very well, you're doing an excellent job, you are on your way, you'll get recognized as a great poet. Okay, but this idea of the imagination and what happens within your imagination, within your mind, recollecting stuff, thinking deeply about things, drawing on your own, on your inner recesses. No, this does not happen with people before the Romantics. So for the Romantics, the focus is also on the imagination, like Jihan is saying. Okay, so when it comes to imagination, we cannot also ignore the idea of self-expression. For the Romantics, self-expression was all in all. And what do we mean by self-expression? We mean that the poet uh, get affected by what happens around him in outside nature, and then when he goes home, perhaps when he refrains to himself, he starts to recollect what he have seen in nature, and then that would be an opportunity for him to express his feelings. So the word feelings is key here. Prior to the Romantics, there was no room for feelings. Okay, so it was very dry. Poetry before the Romantics, especially with the neoclassical poets, poetry was very dry. No room for emotions and feelings. With the Romantics, it's a totally different story. Romantic um, poetry is also about the feelings of the poet. Okay, that's why we're talking about self-expression. The focus is on whatever is inside rather than on whatever is outside. The poet is not a man holding a mirror to nature. Nature in the neoclassical sense. Nature in the neoclassical sense would mean the garden, whatever is artificial and whatever is human made or man made. No, the poet would focus on himself, and this is what we're going to see in one of Wordsworth's poems. At one point, he would go out in nature. The poem that we have done, the Daffodils and what happens. You need to always remember that he was not alone. The poem indicates, when you read the Daffodils, you think that Wordsworth is alone in nature. But when you read the journal or the diary of his sister Dorothy, you get to know that it was a shared experience. Okay, but this is what the Romantics are about. It's about self-expression. It's about feeling alone in nature in a positive and in perhaps a negative sense. Um, okay, so self-expression, nature, right? Yes, again, like Abir is saying, the idea of solitude and loneliness, like I said. Okay, they feel lonely. They would perhaps want to be alone with nature, because they think that this is part of the experience. Okay, so you cannot write poetry in groups, for example. You have to refrain to yourself, and you try to kind of think of and recollect what you have seen over the day or over the week in nature, and then that would be fuel enough for you to write poetry and to express whatever is inside you, right? um, Two contradictory things we have with the Romantics. We have simple diction, simple vocabulary, and simple language with some of them, and we have complicated language uh, with others. Okay, you also have with some you're talking about pure nature. You're talking about the here and the now. With some others, you they take you all the way to Greek mythology and classical learning and classical philosophy, and they have some they make allusions and references to those classical mythology ideas and stories. Again, you have the two. You have the two. Um, Remember, when we spoke about the Romantics in England. We said that we have what we call first generation Romantics, and we also have second generation Romantics. First generation Romantics would include people like Wordsworth and Coleridge. With second generation Romantics, you would have Shelley, Keats, Lord Byron. What's the difference, if any? Is it only age that we're referring to? No. With age comes also a lot of differences. First generation Romantics would focus on the idea of purity, on the idea of innocence, on the idea of nature and solitude, and also the workings of the imagination. With second generation Romantics, you have perhaps political commitment. You would have Greek mythology and the mythologies of different countries. You would have complicated diction or vocabulary. So the experience is different with the second generation Romantics. They are, like I said, very politically committed. So all of them, whether first generation or second generation, are all romantics. All of them are romantics, but they perhaps because of the change of the age and the change of the atmosphere, they have different concerns. Again, they are romantics, but they express this romanticism in their unique ways. This is basically what we spoke about last time in the part on poetry. And I remember very vividly that I asked you to prepare Wordsworth, the poems that we are taking for Wordsworth. So have you done that? Okay, so Abir is saying, yes, I have read the 4 poems. Okay, nice, good. Who else? Okay, Ranim did. That's interesting. So we're 27 people, by the way. So who else did just that? Okay, okay, I'm Mona. Okay, time, nice. So like I said, and Budur also. That's interesting. Okay, good. Uh, okay. Okay. Bye. So we're doing Wordsworth tonight, and we're doing his different poems. And what are the different poems that we have for Wordsworth? We have the Daffodils, Point Rash, Judgement, the Daffodils, Point Rash, Judgement, the Brothers, and Home at Grasmere. Very interesting poems that we're doing tonight. Can you hear noise in the background? I'm sorry. Can you hear noise? Okay. 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 We're going to take them one at a time. We have four of them. Okay. So perhaps you would like to give me some impressions that you collected now that you have read them, some observations. So w- what is it? I mean, now that you have read the four poems, what do you make of Wordsworth as a poet? You may share your impressions, whether you think he is a good poet or not. You can also talk about. You can also set him against the characteristics that we said about the romantics, whether he is a true romantic in the different senses that we have presented earlier or not. By the way, the mic is also open if you want, and it is on. And if you would like to say something, you can always come to the mic. Hmm. Are you saying something? So I can see Abir typing. Again, it would be easy if somebody can come to the mic. But if your mic is not active or is not does not work, or you don't have a mic, that's fine. You just there is um, there is an icon in on top in the middle, and it's like a hand that um, you should raise your hand by clicking it, and if you click it, I can allow you. I can enable you. Click the hand icon in the middle of the page. Yes, that's correct. Okay, Abir, go ahead.
Hello,
Hi,
can you
Abir.
hear me?
Hi. Yes, we can.
Hello,
Yes, we can.
hello.
We can hear you. Go ahead.
So, reading the Daffodils, I got the impression that Wordsworth can be literally a 100% romantic because his emphasis was on nature, wild nature,
Hmm.
and again he just focused on himself. He expressed himself through the first pronoun,
Okay.
while he did not experience the he did not experience it alone, but
Yes.
he just used I. So
Is it
I got the
selfish,
impression that he
Abir?
was
Let me ask you this question. What do you think of that? Is it selfish? Is the romantic poet a selfish individual? From whatever you yeah, kind of
I
recollect.
mean
Yeah, yeah. Go ahead.
I guess not. I think it's good to express his himself. I mean it's been centuries since they focused on dry literature and dry poetry, but it's time for change. That's what he did, and that's what the Romantics did. So I don't think it's selfish at all.
Okay. So this was the first poem, the Daffodils. How about the other poems? Did you you said that you read them all, right?
Yes, I have. Yeah, yeah, yeah. The other poem, I was really impressed with the poem that that was recounting. It was a sort of a novel. Like it was. I I think it was the brothers,
Ah, yeah.
if I'm
The
not like
Brothers is very
correct.
long. Yes. Yeah, yeah, it's more or less. It has this narrative element to it, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, it's like a story in its own right, right? It has
yeah,
like
yeah,
beginning, middle, and perhaps an end. Sad as it is, right?
yeah, yeah.
Mm.
But then again, the other one, point Rash Judgement, he was not alone, so that can eliminate any ideas of selfishness we can develop
That's a
in the
good point.
daffodils
Thank you for
poems.
that. Thank you. You're defending him, and now you have justifications, right? Yeah, that's
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah.
Yes, that's interesting. Okay, so we're talking about characteristics that we can glean from the poems. I mean, if we set whatever he said in the poems against the characteristics that we've been talking about, and Abir is saying that yeah, there is a great deal of romantic echoes in Wordsworth poetry, right, Abir? This is what you have in
Yes,
mind?
yes,
Okay, absolutely.
exactly, yes.
Excellent, Abir. MashaAllah. Thank you so much. God bless you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Can we have somebody else? Perhaps come to the mic and share with us her thoughts and ideas, insights into the poems. Hmm. Anybody else? Who do we have, Aslan? Let me check the names. Do we have? We normally have names. I don't know where I can get that. Mm, where can we get the names? Names. Yeah. No, I don't know where I can get that. Okay. Anyway, so if you don't want to come to the mic, you may type, for example. Budur is saying what actually makes anyone interested in Wordsworth poems would be the simplicity and the floods of imagination and sensations, and we could easily notice this in his words. Yeah, that's an interesting insight. Thank you, Budur. Okay. Uh, so uh, the conclusion would be that Wordsworth is a typical romantic poet. Okay. Okay. So let's. Doha wants to say something. Doha, right? Let's go to the poems themselves and see whether he lives up to our expectations as a romantic poet or not. So the first poem that we were handling, the Daffodils, and we spoke enough about the Daffodils, and I don't think I have more to add. You can always go back to the video and watch it if you want any. What was the focus in the Daffodil or on? It was kind of twofold. You have the poet on the one hand, then you have outside nature with its different elements, and on top of these elements would be the daffodils, of course. Daffodils is part of nature, and man is part of nature. They interact, and out of this interaction and this gay atmosphere that they built, we had other elements of nature participating or encouraged to participate, like the waves, if you still remember, right? It's all a dance kind of atmosphere where everybody is obviously having everybody. I mean, of course, the different elements of nature, including the human being or human beings, And here, of course, the persona of the poem or the poet himself is a representation of human beings and of the reader, right? Okay, good. Um, Somebody is saying, so Doha is saying, I think he shows the positive aspects of Romanticism with its emphasis on imagination and nature. Amira is saying, I don't know if others will agree, but Daffodils always sounds sounds sad to me. Perhaps you need to explain why you think it is sad, ya Amira, so that we can think about it, and perhaps we share you this opinion or view. Okay, so we're waiting for Amira. She's typing to perhaps give us reasons why she thinks Daffodils is a sad poem. Can you hear noise? Okay. He says he is a lonely cloud, and this again. So why are you taking the idea? I mean, lonely here, as we have seen, it does not mean it doesn't have this. It doesn't have this emotional, sad emotions or sadly emotional baggage that you have in mind. Lonely means that he was alone. Okay, so it's solitude. It is solitude in a positive sense. Okay, but he wasn't even alone, by the way. Okay, so he's trying to say, or his persona, that he was alone in nature, which is not true, of course, because Dorothy, his sister, is going to come over and say, no, we were together, right? Um, so the loneliness that you're referring to in lonely as a cloud is not the sad loneliness uh, that we normally have in mind. Okay, lonely means that he was alone, and like a cloud here is an indication that he was, you know, free. Clouds are up in the sky where you can have this panoramic view of the world. Well, obviously, who was happy? Who wouldn't happy to be kind of roaming the earth from above, seeing what other people cannot see, right? So he wasn't sad, and loneliness here does not have those sad associations that we normally associate with loneliness. Loneliness here means that he was alone. He should have, perhaps he should have said, I wandered alone like a cloud, but for perhaps poetic reasons he wouldn't have been able to do that. Okay. Okay. Nice observation, Amira, and I'm hopeful that we have cleared it out for you. Uh, okay. Any other ideas about the daffodils? Because, like I said, we have spoken enough and long about it, and again, it's a typical romantic poem. Uh, Typical in the sense that you have outside nature and the different elements of nature, the harmony that we have um, about those different elements of nature. They have shown us just that. And we have the poet. he goes out in nature, he gets affected by whatever beautiful scenes he see, and then he refrains to himself when perhaps he goes home or something, and he lies down and he starts to recollect what he has seen. And out of those recollections and out of the sweet sensations that he gets, he started to write the beautiful poems that he shares with us. Okay, so different stages that we have. Okay, so the second poem is Point Rash Judgement. I think I have the poem here. Let me share it with you. So this is all. The poems that we're talking about are part of what we call the Lyrical Ballads. The Lyrical Ballads is a collection of poems. It's actually the manifesto of romantic poetry and Romanticism. Manifesto is when you're starting a movement, you're starting something big, and you're writing a book or perhaps a statement explaining what you have in mind, and perhaps giving examples of the scenarios that you're kind of putting out. So the poems that we were doing with Wordsworth are part of his lyrical ballads. The lyrical ballads was jointly written by Wordsworth and Samuel Coleridge, and it has a number of editions. I mean, they have written it once, and then they made new editions in order to perhaps add new poems, in order, for example, to tweak the vision and the mission a little bit, using our contemporary terms. Okay, so poems on the naming of places. What is it that they are doing? What do they mean by the naming of places? You know, it strikes me as very similar to the idea. Is it an ayah? Is it a verse that we're having in the Quran? وَعَلَّمَ آدَمَ الْأَسْمَاء. You know, when Adam first came to earth and he started to kind of name things, right? It's very similar. Obviously, when Adam came down to earth, it was nature, pure nature, no human beings. He is the first man, right? Or the first human being, right? And then he starts to stick labels to things. This is perhaps a field, this is a river. This is how I imagine stuff. So it is as if the Romantics, as represented by Wordsworth, are recreating the world. They are recreating the world in their own terms, right? Perhaps I'm reading too much into it. And stop me when you think that I'm moving too far and I'm having extreme views and impressions. But this is the beauty of poetry. I mean, the sky is obviously the limit when it comes to interpretations, when it comes to this idea of intertextuality that we've been talking about. I mean, putting things together, right? So poems on the naming of places. Do we have a naming of places here in this poem? I'm asking you. Yes. So what is it that they are doing? They are giving places new names, because obviously they are not happy with the names that are there. Why? Because the names that are there are obviously, perhaps town names, perhaps created by corrupt human beings, right? They want to change the scene altogether. So this happens at the end of the poem, and this happens out of an experience that they had. It's a misjudgment, a miscalculation that they made, the three of them. Remember, we have the poet and two other people, I mean. Uh, um, let's talk about the scenario. What happens? Are we in outside nature, like always? Yes, we are. We are in outside nature. Is it pure nature, innocent nature, or is it? Are they in a garden, or more like a jungle that they are in, a forest of a sort? What do you think? Okay, so it's nature in the romantic sense, right? Pure nature. And they are obviously walking through nature, right? And what happens? Um, when you read about it, you will get to know, perhaps from the journal of Dorothy, you're going to get to know that it's Wordsworth, Coleridge, and Dorothy, right? Okay. So three of them, they walk around in nature, and what happens after that? Okay, this would come much later, Abir. First of all, they would go around and look at stuff and, yeah, kind of think about the implications, and right. And then at one point they would, like Abir is saying, they would meet or see, a man. So what happens when they see the man? So what kind of attitude did they have? Was it positive? What did they take the man for? Yeah, there was some kind of misinterpretation of and misconstruing of the intentions of the man. They took him for a lazy guy. I mean, who, instead of perhaps joining the other groups in reaping something in the harvest, there it was a harvest time. Okay, so instead of going there, I mean, they were under the false impression that this guy is trying to shy away from work. He doesn't want to work, right? He doesn't want to participate in harvesting. Okay, but this is not true, right? We will, from also the description of the persona, we're going to get to know that this guy is perhaps sick, is tired, is old. He is obviously unable to go and work with the others. He is perhaps physically feeble. He cannot. So what does he settle for? He was kind of, was he catching fish, I think, which is easier than you know harvesting and yes. So they kind of judged him in a negative way. They misjudged him. But perhaps on second thoughts, when they came closer to him, they found out that he is old and sick and physically uh, unable to do the stuff that other people may do, right? And what happens after this realization? When they came to this realization, what did they do? They felt how? How did they feel? Of course, they felt bad, right? They felt very bad, and in order to make amends for this kind of arrogance that they have shown, for this kind of miscalculation that they made, they decided to do what? They decided to rename the place. So every time they come back, they would be reminded of what they did, and perhaps they would humble down, and they show some humility, right? Yes. Okay. So again, we're talking about this idea of renaming places, and we said because the Romantics are trying to organize the world in their own terms. Okay. So point Rash Judgement. So the area now is named Point Rash Judgement. Okay, it's Rash Judgement. Rash means that you're quick about your assessments of things, and rashness is an impulsive kind of judgment, which is not calculated, which is not. I mean, you don't think twice about something, which is obviously bad. So you need to study the decisions that you make. You need to study things before you kind of make judgments and assessments. This seems to be the message, right? So this is part of the renaming business that they are having, renaming stuff, and the renaming is normally very significant because it would refer to a situation that they have gone through. Again, it's the countryside that we're having. It's outside nature, and it's also this admiration for simple human beings, right? So this guy, this old simple man, is part of nature, right? They finally appreciate what he does, you know, earning his livelihood. Okay, he is not the lazy individual that they thought he was. What else would you like to perhaps add about the poem? Nothing? So if it's nothing, it's okay. I mean, we can always move. Okay. So how many stanzas? It's long. I don't know whether I can consider this whole part a stanza. I don't know. I mean, even the dividing points are not very clear. Can you consider these? I mean, so how many lines? We have like 20 lines. Can you consider these lines stanzas? What do you think? We wouldn't. I think a whole part cannot be a stanza, right? We have stanzas within this. Okay, so I'll go through it so that it can get recorded and the video. Okay. So, and point rash judgment is the name it now bears. This is the conclusion, right? Abir is saying there is a hyphen. Isn't that what marks the beginning of each stanza? Um, I, I don't see hyphens actually. I see like a line or two, an empty line between. It's very strange. I mean, even the parts are not. They don't have the same length, right? Some of them are very long, and others are not as long. Okay. Um, I would like you to read the poem. Perhaps if you haven't read it, you now have a chance to read it, and you have it in front of your eyes because it has perhaps some interesting things that I would like to highlight. So let's take um, the different parts one at a time. Again, you're reading it with the characteristics of the romantics in mind, right? Okay. So a narrow girdle of rough stones and crags, a rude and natural causeway. By the way, the word rude here means tough, rough, not smooth, right? And it's natural, okay? Even the word natural is used here. And of course, you have water, you have rivers, right? You have, of course, the sun, all the elements of nature are there. Leaves, weed. Uh, I mean, it gives you the, if you still remember the daffodils, it's perhaps very similar to how we started the daffodils, if you still remember. Okay. Uh, I mean, as you can see, the persona of the poet, who happens to be the poet himself, is moving around. And I mean, they talk about the different elements of nature and what they do with them, right? And then somehow, like we said, they are going to spot this helpless man, and they would come up with a judgment about his behavior, his assumed behavior. This is what they perceived. Right? A perception is normally wrong. And then they are going to make amends when they realize that they have they misjudged him. And then comes the idea or the process of renaming the place so that they can be a reminder, a constant reminder. Every time they go there, they can always um, get reminded of their misbehavior, if you like. What do you think of the language? Let me ask you about the diction or the vocab and the language in general. Do you think it's complicated? Yes or no? Is it difficult to understand? Are you sure you cannot hear noise? Okay. I have all the noise there is. You cannot imagine. I mean, it's a neighbor um, on the. Okay, it's okay. It's good that you cannot hear. Okay, you can hear it. I just want to make sure that you can hear it. You can hear it. You can hear the noise because I mean, when there is noise, the icon does not move. It's only when I speak. If I was under the impression that you cannot hear it or you. Okay. I am distracted. Don't worry. If you're not distracted, I am, but it's okay. Anyway, let's move somewhere else. Okay. Yeah, Budur is saying, I remember one ode for Wordsworth I read when I was young. Its name is Ode of Immortality. When I read those poems, I found them Wordsworthian. Okay, that's a very interesting way of putting it. Um, Budur is saying it's Wordsworthian, which means that you have a Wordsworthian concept. When I say Wordsworthian, it means that it sums up qualities and ideas about Wordsworth. We're talking about his poetry, of course. The idea of nature, the idea of the lone or lonely poet or persona, um, you know, simple diction, um, looking for material that would tie the different elements of nature together, right? The idea of looking at nature as with its edifying effect, uh, uh, it teaches you things. It teaches you purity, it teaches you innocence, excuse me, and all these kinds of things. Okay, let's move to another poem. Uh, the Brothers, a very beautiful poem. I mean, I shouldn't spoil it for you. I'm not going to say anything until you have finished, perhaps talking about it. Okay, so when we say the brothers, what do you have to say about the brothers? And who are the brothers? And how many brothers are they? I think I have the poem. Let me check. Yeah, this is the one. No, this is. Mm, yeah, this is the poem. So you read you read the brothers, right? Okay. So how different is the brothers if you compare it to Point, Rash, Judgment? What? Let's talk about the similarities first. How similar are they? Okay, Abir is saying this one is long and it has a narrative element to it. It's a story that we're having, right? Okay, okay. So what's happening in the poem? It's about what? What's the storyline? Yes, Ranim is saying something very interesting. It is more like an epic poem. It doesn't have, epic poems. There is more to epic poetry than just the length. Yeah, Ranim. Uh, um, the length is an element, but there are other elements. Like for example, the style is very grand. You're talking about heroes. You're talking about demigods. You're talking about mythology. Okay, it's bigger than that. So in its narrative element, it can be considered, a variation on the epic traditions. But there is, like I said, there is obviously way more to epics than just a long narrative. Okay. So the brothers, obviously, we're talking about two brothers. One of them, uh, I mean, we are in obviously in perhaps the. Are we in the countryside? Yes, perhaps. One of the two brothers decides. Okay, so somebody is giving us. So Ranim is saying the poem is about Leonardo, who it's not William, but maybe in some how he is using him as example for whom. I'm not sure I understood. Again, we're talking about two brothers. One of them, I mean, they kind of um, leave. One of them decides to kind of go out, perhaps looking for better opportunities. And he stays I mean, outside for quite some time. And he has this wish to at one point come back to wherever he is from and reunite with his and get reunited with his brother, and they live peacefully. He goes and he comes back, and we're having the experience. I mean, he moves around, he looks at the places, and whatever he left behind, he would meet the priest of the village, and he would talk to him, and he would I mean, the priest would consider him like a tourist. He doesn't, perhaps at the beginning, he wouldn't be able to recognize him as a native of the place, right? over time, I mean, he would even judge him and say negative things to him. Over time, this brother will get to know that his brother is now dead, and somehow the priest would take sympathy and take pity on him. Right? Am I correct? Yeah, he comes back home to find his brother, only the only brother that he has. Come to know his brother is dead. Yes. Okay. So how romantic the poem is? Is it romantic in any way? Ranim is saying, I think it is perhaps more dramatic than romantic. Yeah, I mean, when I say romantic, I don't mean romance. I mean, does it have elements of the romantic to it? Remember, nature, solitude, these different things. This is what I mean. Yeah, yeah, it has this dramatic element to it, yeah, Ranim, but it is also a romantic poem. Romantic how? This is my question. Romantic. Do we have nature? Yes, right. What else do we have that would tie the poem to the romantics? Habir is saying it expresses the feelings of the homecoming of wanderers. Yes. You have a wanderer, right? So the idea of wandering that we have seen in Daffodils, we also have a wanderer here, right? But perhaps the experience is bigger than the one that we have seen in Daffodils, right? It's uh, it's about loss. It's about solitude in a negative sense this time around, right? This man is now feels alienated, feels estranged, right? Nobody recognizes him. When he goes back home, nobody recognizes him, which is a very difficult feeling to experience, right? They would refer to him and they would look at him as a tourist, right? This is sad, right? Very sad indeed. Hmm. So the poem, in general terms, is about this sense of loss, this sense of alienation. You feel estranged from your circle, right? It's about not being recognized by your people for whatever reasons, right? Yeah, there is Maha is saying that you have this sense of the outcast or the outsider. Okay, an outsider is somebody that does not belong, and not belonging is a very difficult feeling, right? So, I mean, men and I mean human beings are meant to be to live in groups, right? Human beings are not lone animals, if you like. So one mark of our humanity would be the idea that we exist in groups. Okay, you live in with people. You don't live on the margins of society alone. And those who live on the margin of society alone are not normally looked upon with in a positive sense. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Okay. Um, I want it recorded. That's why I'll move with it so that people can. Okay. It's a long poem, like people are saying, but that's why it's taking time. It's very long. I mean, I don't know what's very long indeed. I'm trying to record it so that you can always go back to it. I'm of course recording the poem and the noise that comes with it. Right? Uh, yeah, William Wordsworth, finally. Okay. Okay, so let's now move to the fourth poem. This is Home at Grasmere. So, how much do you know about this poem, if any? And what is it that he was trying to kind of prove in this poem? It's a long poem as well, right? Let me play it from the internet, and I would like to check. I would like to check whether you will hear the. I mean, there is obviously a recitation of the poem. Let me check if you can get that or not. Please let me know if you're getting that.
Home at Grasmere. Bleak season was it, turbulent and bleak, when hitherward we journeyed, and on foot, through bursts of sunshine and through flying snows, paced the long vales. How long they were, and yet how fast that length of way was left behind, Wensley's long vale and Sedber's naked heights. The frosty wind, as if to make amends for its keen breath, was aiding to our course, and drove us onward like two ships at sea. Stern was the face of nature. We rejoiced in that stern countenance, for our souls had there a feeling of their strength. The naked trees, the icy brooks, as on we passed, appeared to question us. Whence come ye? To what end? They seemed to say. What would ye? Said the Shah. Wild wanderers, whither through my dark domain? The sunbeam said, Be happy. They were moved, all things were moved. They round us as we went, we in the midst of them. Thrice hath the winter moon been filled with light, since that dear day when Grasmere, our dear vale, received us. Bright and solemn was the sky that faced us with a passionate welcoming, and led us to our threshold, to a home within a home, what was to be, and soon our love within a love. Then darkness came, composing darkness, with its quiet load of full contentment, in a little shed disturbed, uneasy in itself as seemed, and wondering at its new inhabitants. It loves us now, this vale so beautiful, begins to love us. Grasmere.
Okay. So you guys said that you have read it before. Um, so typical romantic, right? Where we're talking also about the elements of nature. This poem, especially this poem, is about him. I mean Wordsworth choosing Grasmere Lake. I think it's called Lake something. He chose that place for permanent residence after living perhaps all his life in the city. He decided to perhaps spend the rest of his life in the countryside, in Lake Grasmere and the surrounding area, right? And he's talking about the experience of going there and perhaps exploring the place. You normally go as a tenant of a new place. You go and explore the place, right? You place even the district and stuff like that. So this time around, it is you exploring the place as a tenant or as a resident, and you also the place is also exploring you. Uh, this is how I understood it. Look at the reaction of the elements of nature. Obviously, at the beginning, there wasn't that warm welcome, if you like. But over time, those same elements of nature started to open up, and perhaps he came close to them, and they got to know that he is not an enemy, if you like. He is a friend, not an enemy. And those different elements of nature started to impress him. Okay, remember, he came to stay. He became part of them. So enmity at the beginning gave way to friendship and companionship. Am I reading much into it? Do you think uh, are these the ideas that you got from the poem, or what? Yeah, let's talk about it. Abir, if you want to come to the mic, it's okay. Anybody else, you guys are more than welcome. Hmm. Okay. Abir is saying the poem, just like the brothers, is an epic. I got the impression that he was using it as an announcement for his arrival. Okay. So, and how, my question is about the reception. Was he well received, at least at the beginning? Ranim is saying the poem here is a contrast between a boy and an adult of the, I'm not sure, home. I don't see any boys in the poem, or any boy. Yeah, do we have boys in the poem that I'm not aware of? Are you reading the same poem, yeah, Ranim? Here in this poem, we also have a William. I don't see any Williams in this poem. Can you see any Williams in this poem, everyone? It's home at Grasmere that we're doing, yeah? So Abir and Ranim are typing, but that's why I'm waiting. Maha is saying she means the author, I think. Ah, you mean by William William Wordsworth? I'm sorry. Okay, okay. Oh, okay. And normally people, I mean, give the, I mean, the they give the family name, but that's why. Okay, I'm sorry, Ranim. I got it all wrong. Okay. Okay, so Abir is saying when he says such power and joy, but only for this end, after describing the image, so vividly, he put himself as an outsider, an observer. Yes. Okay. So again, I'm stressing the fact that perhaps at the beginning he wasn't welcomed, or the welcome was not um, as good as he expected. Yeah, but over time he will. I mean, so Ranim is saying that she doesn't like the poem as much as she liked the other. Yes. So it's about, coming close to nature. It's about also exercising some patience because you're an outsider. You never lived in nature, so it's only natural that you will met you'll be met with perhaps doubts and suspicions until you establish yourself over there, until you prove that you are worthy of being a part of nature, which what he did. If you look at the poem from a political point of view, you will get to know that this is Wordsworth trying to make sense of the situation that he is now in. This is after the French Revolution. Remember, I told you at one point that he was a supporter of the revolution, and perhaps he wrote poems glorifying the revolution. But when the revolution failed, and the French Revolution, and it started to turn nasty and bloody and everything, uh, um, the government started to kind kind of, wake up to those who are, uh, uh, you know who who supported the revolution. And there was this, I wouldn't call it a witch hunt, but they were, those people, those revolutionary writers and poets, were under the radar of the government. One way of escaping the grip of the government would be to travel away, like Shelley did. He went and lived in Italy. Um, if you talk about Wordsworth, Wordsworth started to kind of reconsider his views. He started to say, "Listen, I'm not. I wasn't right. This was a miscalculation." And he started to show support for the government. But it doesn't seem that he was totally accepted. That's why he started to think of Grasmere and those areas in the countryside, so that he can be away from perhaps the eyes of the government. Together with the fact that he has his own reasons. He was obviously born in the countryside, and he likes the countryside. He likes outside nature. But part of the reason why he decided to go and live in the countryside was the idea to stay away from the government, um, and to stay away from politics after the frustration and the disappointment that he got, when the French Revolution turned nasty and bloody. Uh, so again, the poems that he had, um, at the time, were all about him making sense of this new experience, calculating whether he will be happy over there, whether he will be accepted, perhaps by the people. He is, after all, an outsider. Okay, so we'll read them. I would like you to read them again on your own, and we might revisit them again next time. I would like you to read the poems of Shelley. And Shelley's poems are so diverse. You have different types, and I'm sure they will prove very engaging to you, given the fact that we have diversity. I read Shelley's poems. What are the poems that we have for Shelley? For Shelley, you have To a Skylark, you have Ode to the West Wind, you have England in 1819, you have The Mask of Anarchy, you have To the Lord Chancellor, Ozymandias, written on hearing the news of the death of Napoleon. Um, a long gallery of works. So again, when you read them, I'm sure you're going to like them. So start reading them, and when we meet again on Saturday, inshallah, we can always talk about them and end this chapter and move to something else. So, do you have any questions? I trust that you all have submitted your TMAs. Have you all submitted your TMAs? Okay, all of us. Okay, nobody's left behind, huh? Okay, so I'll download them and I'll start working on them. Perhaps on Saturday I can give you your grades, inshallah. Okay, so on this note and with this item, we'll come to the end of today's class. Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum.